Waking up was extremely painful for John. His eyes stung as if they had been sprinkled with red pepper mixed with sand. His head was splitting from an unbearable, throbbing pain. The worst thing was that after waking up, pitch darkness opened up before him. No light from a lamp, no rays of sunlight that should have penetrated through the blinds by this time. "Where am I?" John exclaimed, shuddering at the sound of his own voice. At the same moment, somewhere to the left of him, he heard the shuffling of feet and someone's pleasant melodic voice said,
"You're in Mandurah Hospital. A few days ago, you were in a car accident, and now you have problems with your eyesight."
John's back was instantly covered in sticky sweat. "Tell me, this is not permanent, is it? I will not remain blind," the guy exclaimed.
"It would be better to ask your doctor about this, but I think that you will definitely have to wear a bandage for 2 to 3 weeks.
The nurse answered after thinking for a bit. John felt relieved. He didn't want to spend the rest of his days in pitch darkness, and so he was ready to wait out these evil 3 weeks. At that moment, John remembered everything. He was returning from a party with friends. It was raining heavily. He drank more than he should have and was driving along an empty, slippery highway. The car skids, and now John and his crossover are flying towards a huge tree trunk, followed by a strong blow and a sharp pain plunging him into sticky, impenetrable darkness. This was the last thing John remembered. "Good morning, John. My name is Greg. How are you feeling?" A male voice was heard from somewhere to the side. John immediately guessed that this pleasant baritone belonged to his doctor. "My head hurts, and the darkness is very scary. I don't know how to live now." John answered. "Do you have relatives or close friends who could help you at first?" the doctor asked. "My relatives live on the East Coast. Here, I only have colleagues at work." "The situation is not simple. Just don't be scared. But according to my most modest forecasts, you will have to spend about 6 months in the dark with a blindfold." The doctor's words shocked John. "How is that possible?" The nurse said 3 weeks. The doctor shook his head. "Your insurance covered all expenses. You will be provided with a social worker. Your indicators are normal, and in a couple of hours you will be able to leave the hospital. I will come to you later." John moved to Western Australia 6 months ago. In the small town of Pinjarra, he was offered a good job. He rented a room from an elderly couple. They certainly cannot help him. The only option was to return to the suburbs of Brisbane to his parents' house. He did not want to be a burden for his elderly parents, but still, it was better than being completely alone and in the dark here. John asked the nurse to find his sister's number on his smartphone. After explaining the situation, John asked her to come get him, but his sister said she could only do so in 6 weeks, as she was currently on holiday with her family in Europe. His sister couldn't, but the social worker would probably help him pack his things and put him in a taxi to the airport. As if sensing his state of mind, the nurse standing nearby quietly said,
"If you need help, I know where you can get it. 45 kilometers from here. There is a special boarding house for people who have lost their sight. They're taught how to behave in conditions of complete lack of visibility. There, each patient is given an assistant to support them at first and teach them to move by touch with a stick. It is a private charity. Its founder is a highly respected retired eye surgeon. The places there are beautiful and quiet, far from the city noise. All around, there is only forest and birds singing. There they will teach you to see through your hearing, so to speak, insight. Think about it. Even if your sister comes for you in 6 weeks, you need help, and the social worker will visit you for no more than an hour a week. In the boarding house, you will have company and care, and it will not cost you anything."
John wasn't particularly keen on living blind for 6 months, but apparently there was no other way out. He couldn't do without outside help. He couldn't work, and he had to pay rent. Social security payments for unemployment are unlikely to be decent after all. He got into an accident due to his own fault. "Thank you." "This is a good offer. I think I'll agree," the guy answered.
Believe me, this is the right decision. I'll arrange everything, don't worry.
The nurse calmed the patient down. After some time, the doctor returned and said that all the documents were ready and John could leave the hospital. The nurse told him that John had agreed to go to Holyoke, so he needed to be given a sedative injection, because it took about an hour to get there, and he shouldn't be too worried on the road. This could increase intracranial pressure, which is undesirable. Also, during this entire time, the bandage should never be removed when they change it, and it is strictly forbidden to lift the eyelids. The doctor said goodbye to John warmly and wished him a quick recovery and enlightenment. The nurse helped him out into the street, where a taxi driver was already waiting for him. John greeted the taxi driver and asked him not to drive too fast, as he had a bad headache.
Mate, aren't you overreacting with this boarding house? There are some bad rumors going around.
The taxi driver asked. "What kind of rumors? It's a charity. What could be wrong?" John asked. The taxi driver waited a short pause, as if mentally calculating what to say to this client.
You may not believe me, but not a month goes by that someone doesn't die in that boarding house. Last week, a poor guy ripped his stomach open with a broken bottle, and a month ago, a blind man was found hanging in the woods. I live in Dwellingup, which is just outside Holyoke where you're going, and all the locals try to avoid it, even the tourist routes avoid it. Something terrible is going on there.
The story told by the taxi driver made John shudder and sweat from head to toe, but then when he thought it over, he realized that the driver was simply playing a joke on him. Finally, the car stopped, and John realized that they had arrived. For some reason unknown to him, his heart began to beat like crazy. His throat was so dry that his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth.
Good luck to you, buddy.
The taxi driver said goodbye and drove away. John muttered something unintelligible in response. At that very moment, a pair of strong hands grabbed him under the arms and dragged him somewhere. John moved his legs quickly. If he wanted, he could have tucked his legs under himself, and these men would have carried him exclusively through the air like a small child. Soon, John realized that they were going up the steps and apparently entering a building. When he inhaled the stale, musty smell, he felt uneasy. It stank like hell inside. John was very roughly seated on a hard bench, and someone's hoarse voice said, "Sit here for a while. Your guide will come to you now." "Can I take a beautiful girl as a guide?" John decided to joke. "There are no women among the service personnel." They answered him dryly.
I'm Sam and I'm your helper.
Pleasant-voiced man said and shook John's hand. The touch of his palm reminded him of sandpaper. "John, very nice to meet you." The guy introduced himself.
Let's go, I'll take you to your room. Remember, you are not allowed to leave its boundaries without me if you want something. Pull the rope. It is above the head of your bed. Understood?
"Understood," John answered.
Then I'm going. Get used to it here for now. Get used to the environment, and I'll drop by later.
Sam said. He pushed John into the room and slammed the door behind him. The guy couldn't see his room, but to the touch it looked like some kind of cell carved out of the rock. The furniture there was a bed covered with smelly linen and a small table with a chair whose legs creaked. John sat down on the bed and listened. When you are deprived of sight, then a minute in the darkness seems like an hour, and an hour like an eternity. The guy didn't know exactly how much time he spent in the room. Most likely it was already getting dark outside. He was suddenly beckoned to sleep, but then it suddenly seemed to John that there was someone else in the room besides him. He was ready to swear that he could hear his intermittent breathing and the hungry rumbling in his stomach. "Hey, who's there? Am I not alone here?" John asked cautiously. A minute of silence followed by a muffled growl served as his answer. "This is not funny at all." John burst into a scream. The angry growl was heard closer, as if some unknown creature had suddenly decided to play a staring contest with him. John's back was covered in goosebumps. He tried to pull the rope, but realized that someone had cut the rope or it had never been there. John had already taken a deep breath in order to scream when someone sat down next to him on the bed, causing it to creak sharply and tilt to one side. Immediately after that, the guy's nostrils clearly felt the sharp smell of carrion and rot in the air. The stench was sharp and suffocating. John sat and could not understand what was happening. His guide, Sam, had left him here alone with a mysterious creature that was getting closer and closer with each passing minute. He backed away on the bed when he felt something cold and sticky crawling up his arm, vaguely reminiscent of a wet, snot-covered shoelace. Still afraid of his own guess, John grabbed it and to his horror realized that his wrist was covered in a dozen annelids, apparently intending to try out human flesh for a taste. No, I don't want to stay here anymore, John screamed and began to throw off the disgusting, writhing vermin. The smell of decay and carrion grew stronger. He jumped out of bed and stumbled, hit his forehead against the wall and fell to his knees. Trying to find a way out, he crawled forward, but immediately ran into the wall. There was no door there. John began to crawl along the wall, intending to turn, but to his horror, the wall had no corners and seemed to stretch out in length, like a huge case. A nasty, disgusting voice he rang out behind him. "You won't leave here until you see clearly." In horror, he instinctively looked around, forgetting that because of the blindfold, he was as blind as a graveyard mole. He had never been so scared. The room suddenly filled with terrible sounds, as if 100 half-decomposed dead people began to grind their teeth. John fell to the floor, clutching his head in his hands. He realized that he had made a huge mistake when he agreed to move here from the clinic. Then, by the will of some evil, inhuman force, he found himself on his back. At the same time, his face was covered with a foul, smelling substance, which he recognized with some difficulty as saliva. But whose was it? He was afraid to even think about it. Feeling completely helpless, John screamed with all his might and cut the air with his hands, hoping to protect himself from some otherworldly force living in his room. He broke his voice to the point of hoarseness. He was gasping for air from suffocation, mentally praying to God for mercy. The situation was becoming critical. John was already preparing for death when somewhere to the side he heard the creak of an opening door. He gathered the rest of his strength into a fist and then fell into the dark abyss of his exhausted consciousness. John did not immediately understand what had happened, and when exactly he came to, someone was simply shaking him very hard by the shoulder and saying,
Wake up, do you hear? Why are you sprawled out here? The bed is very close, just a stone's throw away.
John immediately recognized the voice of his guide. Sam, can't you see anything at all? Some kind of creature lives here, maybe even more than one. Get me out of here quickly, John screamed, but the guide acted as if nothing special had happened. He knew that real evil lived in this lair for the blind. Somehow getting to his feet, John felt his way along the walls to the door.
Have you forgotten what I told you? You can't leave the room without me, and if you disobey, you'll fall down the steps and break your neck,
Sam said in a calm tone. The mention of the stairs made John shudder and stop halfway. Now he understood that without a guide, he would not be able to get out of this abode of horror and fear. Tell me, where are my things? The taxi driver was supposed to give them to me. I want to call my sister. John asked more peacefully. Deep down, he was afraid that Sam would leave him here and go home in order to babysit another mole, which was John himself. Sam was silent for a while and then answered,
There were no things. The taxi driver dropped you off and drove away, no things or bags.
At that moment, despair seized John. He realized that he had voluntarily fallen into a trap full of vile creatures that most likely fed on human bodies and their flesh. Take me out of here. Just take me out of the gate and throw me. I'll get there myself somehow, but be a man. John begged. Sam refused to lead him even beyond the room.
You can't go out yet. You haven't learned to sense danger and do without eyes yet.
The guide answered and began to gradually push John back to the bed. The most interesting thing was that the creature living in the room was either hiding in a dark corner, or it wasn't there at all. Although no, he was sure that it was there. The nauseating smell of death was still in the air. I need to get out of here urgently, at any cost, even on my knees, even crawling, but just to get away from this hellish almshouse. John thought. Sam stood there for a while and then went to the kitchen for lunch. Learning that it was only midday, John almost screamed out loud from shock. He was sure that the village had long been in the grip of darkness, but in fact, the sun was at its zenith, so you can go crazy. When a person is blind, time flows for him the same. You can't tell whether it's day or night. His stomach responded with a dissatisfied rumble, and his mouth instantly filled with saliva when Sam brought fragrant soup in an aluminium bowl. He had been wearing a blindfold for the second day, but he could already hear what he couldn't distinguish before. It's not for nothing that they say that when a person lacks any of the organs of perception of reality, his body sharpens those of the senses that were previously not used to their full potential. He greedily drank the broth. Some strange object like a chicken bone touched his lips, but when John carefully touched it with the tip of his tongue, he shuddered with horror and almost dropped the spoon from his hands. No, it's just a mistake. A piece of chicken leg, nothing special. The guy tried to convince himself, but his consciousness had already found the right answer. Taking the strange object in his hand, John realized that he was not mistaken. It was a finger, a human finger, most likely the index or middle finger, cut off near the second phalanx. Even the nail was preserved in the form it was in when its owner was alive. The realization that he had just tasted human soup made John cover his mouth with his hand and turn away to the wall. Sam stood silently as if nothing special had happened, and that it was not a finger that was found in the soup, but a pork rib.
Stop being scared and flinching at every rustle and creak. Believe me, when you are ready for insight, then all the inconveniences will go away, and you will become one of us.
Sam said slowly. John wanted to answer him something harsh, but held back. They are all crazy here. They eat human flesh and dream of getting some kind of insight. Trying to stop vomiting, John thought.
According to the regulations, I can't lock you in here, but I highly recommend that you don't leave the room without me. Soon the initiation into guides will begin for those who have gained insight and are ready to say goodbye to their past. I'll come to you after the ceremony.
John almost choked on the word about the regulations and initiation. He already understood that he had become a prisoner of crazy sadists who, taking advantage of his helplessness, did whatever they wanted. I need to escape from here today. While they are staring at the ceremony, I will have time to crawl to the exit. But they will catch me, although what difference does it make? There is nothing to lose anyway. No matter how terrible it may sound, the soup gave him strength, even despite the fact that it was a broth of amputated human limbs. Don't worry, Sam. Where will I go? I'll probably sleep, John said in a feigned calm voice. Sam took the plate from the table, coughed and slammed the door instead of saying goodbye. Goodbye, bye-bye, John whispered ironically. The guy didn't have a watch. He decided to wait for an approximate period of time and then proceed to implement his plan. He didn't have to wait long, and the impetus for the action was the loud screams that came from the lower floor. They sounded truly creepy, causing John to tremble all over. Only someone who is being led to the scaffold screams like that, knowing full well that the executioner's axe is dull. Apparently, the initiation mentioned by Sam was a complex of inhuman tortures aimed at causing the subject as much pain and suffering as possible. No, go to hell with your initiation. Somehow see the light without me, John whispered and groped his way to the door. This time he already knew exactly where was, because he remembered the exact moment Sam left. His premonition was not wrong. The door gave in easily. Finding himself in the corridor, John listened then bent over in 3 deaths in order to be less noticeable from the side. Moving along the corridor, he tried to recreate in his mind the entire route he had taken earlier. It was almost impossible to do this. Visual memory is one thing and fantasy is quite another, which most often goes against reality. Moving by touch, John prayed to God to give him at least one chance. One insignificant chance that a sailor who fell overboard a ship, pursued by a flock of man-eating sharks, dreams of. Soon, John realized that ahead there was a staircase leading to the first floor. The screams of the unfortunate who were receiving initiation became louder. This made the guy understand that the place of the nightmarish execution was already a stone's throw. The most interesting thing was that immediately after the screams of the victim maddened by pain, a strange sound was heard that resembled the vile hiss of a snake. Sweating, he continued his descent when, according to rough estimates, he had only a couple of meters left to overcome. He suddenly heard someone's vile falsetto. "Just look at this mole," crawling towards us himself in order to gain insight. At the same time, Sam's cry was heard.
"Stop! Let me do it myself!"
John shuddered and, no longer hiding, rushed forward. At that moment, Sam tried to grab the guy by the neck, but in the bustle of the chase he missed and only ran his hand over John's face and tore off his mask. With horror, John suddenly saw quite clearly the light emitted by the torches inserted into the holder on the wall. "God, I can see it. Why do I need this damned bandage?" flashed through the guy's mind. Turning his head to the left, John saw his tormentors. Their appearance was truly terrible. And first of all, because they were all deprived of eyes in the literal sense of the word. Instead of eyeballs, they had deep holes going straight into the skull. But what John saw in the depths of the room shocked him to the depths of his soul. Only now did it become clear to him what the initiation rite really was. Everything was run by a vile old man who alternately thrust a red-hot rod into the victim's eyes. In fact, the victims of the blind sect were sighted people who, like John, were deceived and forced to wear a blindfold, convincing them that they were blind without a chance to even once see the white light. The realization of the terrible truth made John grab a torch and heartily hit Sam with it, who moved by ear like a mole who mastered the skills of echolocation. The guide's long, curly hair flared up like a piece of oiled tow, instantly turning him into a giant memorial candle. The blind man screamed like a half-slaughtered pig, while his brothers, as if on command, turned their muzzles toward the sound, staring at John with their eye sockets scorched by a red-hot rod. Not wanting to be in this kingdom of freaks any longer, John, with all his strength, rushed to the exit, with the flaming Sam screaming behind him, who could no longer be helped by anything. Having run out into the street, John again found himself in pitch darkness, only this time it was already natural. It was a quiet and moonless evening. John ran at random, not making out the road and not sparing his bloodied legs and knees. The damned sectarians ran after him, guided by hearing better than a pack of greyhounds. John did not know how the blind men managed to scan the space, but they chased him right up to the highway, where the noise of passing cars finally confused them. Having stopped a ride, John asked to take him to the hospital in Mandurah. He also asked the driver to give him a mobile phone. He called the police at the address in Holyoke. From the habit of not having a blindfold, his eyes hurt and watered. But nevertheless, it was better than becoming a follower of the sect. The crazy ones joined the Brotherhood only after their eyes were burned out. John got to the hospital when the clock showed 7:45 p.m. Everything is fine. He made it. After talking with the eye surgeon, John learned a lot of new things. It turned out that the auditory visions that he experienced within the walls of the boarding house were a consequence of the drug that he was injected with within the walls of the clinic. In order for his paranoia to reach its peak as soon as possible, the blind sect broke people in such an inhuman way, bringing them to a state of insanity, when they were already ready to voluntarily deprive themselves of their sight. Of course, the eye surgeon and the nurse were also members of the Brotherhood of the Blind, but for obvious reasons they remained sighted, sending more and more victims to this village of the blind. John also talked to the nurse who had deceived the gullible man with stories about this damned organization. When the police burst into the office in the morning, they found the doctor crawling on the floor with the nurse, their eyes gouged out with a pencil. On the wall, in blood, was written just one word: insight.